Two spacecraft, one built by India and the other by Russia, are hurtling on missions towards our moon by very different routes. But does it matter which touches down first? Right now, a mini space race is afoot. Two spacecraft, one Russian and the other Indian, are headed for the south pole of the moon, where no lander has ever successfully gone before. The Russian and Indian vehicles are on competing quests to search for water ice and potentially useful minerals that might be tucked away in the lunar dust. Such was the timing of the craft's departures that they are due to reach their destinations around the same date. No one planned this showdown, it is simply a curious twist of fate, but one that has got the world watching, and wondering. Who will get there first? Worries around the moon. The timing of Luna 25's arrival seems to have worried the Indian Space Research Organization, who 2 days before Russia's planned launch issued a public statement assessing the increasingly cramped orbital space around the moon. It warned that there are already 6 active spacecraft orbiting the moon, 4 belong to NASA, one is from South Korea and another from an earlier Indian mission, but added that with the arrival of Luna 25 followed by 9 further spacecraft over the next 2 years there will be a growing risk of collisions. It said that its own Chandrayaan-2 spacecraft, which launched 3 years ago, has already had to perform 3 collision avoidance maneuvers to prevent close encounters with NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter and the Korea Pathfinder Lunar Orbiter. For decades, our reading of things that happen in space has been unavoidably shaped by the original space race of the 1960s, in which the United States and the Soviet Union vied to put a human being on the moon. Despite the Soviet Union becoming the first nation to put a satellite in Earth orbit, launch a human into space, and land an uncrewed spacecraft on the moon, the US grabbed the biggest prize of all when the Apollo 11 mission carried astronauts to the lunar surface. Their adventure was broadcast on TV screens around the world and it was followed by further crewed Apollo missions in subsequent years, with the last taking place in 1972. More than 50 years later, the US remains the only country to have achieved a crewed moon landing. The Indian lander, Chandrayaan-3, blasted off from Earth on the 14th of July, packed with a payload of scientific equipment as well as a small, 6-wheeled rover for exploration of the lunar surface. It's due to touch down on the lunar surface on the 23rd of August after first slingshotting around the Earth a few times and spending several weeks orbiting the moon in preparation for the landing. The Russian lander, meanwhile, Luna 25, departed our planet only recently, taking off just after 2 a.m. Moscow time on the 11th of August, 11 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time the 10th of August. It is taking a much faster, more direct route to the moon and could reach the surface in as little as 10 days post-launch, on the 21st of August. Officials at the Russian space agency Roscosmos have made no secret about their desire to be first to make a soft landing at the moon's south pole. But Luna 25's journey might take slightly longer than that, meaning Chandrayaan-3 could arrive on the moon first, in the end. Slow and steady could win this race. The missions, however, reflect the renewed interest in the moon for space exploration. The recent discovery of significant pockets of water ice on our nearest celestial neighbor has excited scientists because hydrogen in the water could potentially be extracted to make rocket fuel at a future moon base. Plus, the water might even be drinkable after treatment. The so-called race between Luna 25 and Chandrayaan-3 encapsulates a new era of lunar exploration, in which nations including the US, Israel, and China, as well as private companies, are targeting the moon with spacecraft and forthcoming crewed missions. For many, it's just friendly competition. And yet, a fresh chapter of human exploration is at stake. The small steps taken by individual landers and crewed missions could add up to giant leaps in conquering the solar system in the coming decades and centuries. Who gets there first really could matter. It's turned out to be more of a coincidence than anything, says Wendy Whitman-Cobb, professor of strategy and security studies at the U.S. Air and Space Force's Air University, referring to the timing of the Luna 25 and Chandrayaan-3 missions. But it is a very interesting coincidence. Luna 25's launch has been repeatedly delayed. It was originally scheduled for 2021. India has a leg up, she says, since its spacecraft is already in orbit around the moon. The Russians probably feel some pressure to get there first, though, she suggests, given their more direct route. Chandrayaan-3 is twice as heavy as Luna 25 and was also launched using a much less powerful rocket, meaning it needed to build up speed by taking large elliptical orbits around the Earth before it could swing out towards the moon itself. Operators of the two craft will have to assure themselves of the performance of each vehicle before starting the touchdown procedure. Unexpected malfunctions could push the attempt back or scupper it entirely. They won't know how it's going to go, really, until they get there. National pride will probably be a factor in pushing ahead wherever possible. Russia is arguably hoping to prove its continued capabilities in space given that the country's space program has been affected by sanctions following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Their space industry has really suffered, says Whitman Cobb. But it's hardly a race to the moon, as such, for Russia, says Stefania Palladini, who studies the space industry at Queen Margaret University in the UK, because the former Soviet Union succeeded in putting multiple landers and even rovers on the moon 50 years ago. In that sense, the Russians won the race long ago and, clearly in homage to that, the name Luna 25 harks back to the last Russian lunar mission, Luna 24 in 1976. The Soviet Luna 1 space probe is regarded as the first spacecraft to reach the moon. Observers concluded that it was designed to impact the lunar body but instead passed it by 3,725 miles, 5,995 kilometers, above its surface, in 1959. Conversely, if Chandrayaan-3 touches down as planned, it would be the first time for India to actually succeed in achieving a soft landing on the moon, says Palladini, noting how the nation's previous attempt, with the Chandrayaan-2 lander, ended in failure when the vehicle crashed onto the lunar surface in September 2019. India has technically sent a spacecraft to the moon's south pole before with its Moon Impact Probe, which smashed into a ridge close to Shackleton Crater in November 2008, but it was far from being a soft landing and the spacecraft was never expected to survive the landing. You might also like the bizarre US plan to nuke the moon. How the moon is making days longer on Earth. The spacesuits designed for the next lunar explorers. What is new here is the targeted landing sites at the south pole of the moon. No spacecraft has ever touched down there successfully. All of the Apollo missions went to locations further north, near to the moon's equator. Those landing sites featured relatively smooth terrain and plenty of sunlight. At the South Pole, in contrast, the terrain is much bumper, littered with craters, and light from the sun arrives at a harsher angle.